All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Renting to Refugees in Michigan webinar for landlords. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to join us today. My name is Emma Davis. I'm a Community Development Program Manager at Global Detroit, and along with my colleague Scott Preston, I facilitate the Southeast Michigan Refugee Collaborative. The collaborative is composed of resettlement agencies, local government and public departments, social service providers, and other organizations who work across sectors to improve integration outcomes for refugees in our region. We focus on housing, employment, funding, and cultural orientation, and this webinar is a product of our housing work group. So a special shout out to Shrina Ida of Jewish Family Services and Melanie Grund of Oakland County for their leadership with that work group. I'd like to thank our presenting partners, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Immigrant and Refugee Resource Collaborative of Mid-Michigan, the Kalamazoo Refugee Resource Collaborative, and Freedom Flight out of Grand Rapids. I'd also like to thank the partners across the state who helped share this webinar with all of you, Michigan State Housing Development Authority and landlord, rental property owners, property management, and realtor associations across the state. This webinar was inspired by a similar one put together by Welcoming Pittsburgh in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. And we wanted to reach out directly to landlords because housing is a specific need of refugees, particularly as they first arrive in the US. We wanted to talk to you directly, raise awareness, assuage any hesitations you might have in renting to refugees, and recruit you as refugee-friendly landlords. At the end of the webinar, you'll have an opportunity to sign up for a contact list, which resettlement agencies across the state will be able to utilize as they house their clients, and they'll be able to contact you directly. The structure of this webinar, let's see. We'll start off with an overview of refugees and resettlement, and then we have an incredible panel lined up of housing and refugee resettlement experts who will discuss the reliability of refugee tenants, fair housing and legal concerns, as well as HUD programs that might be of interest to you, personal stories, and then we'll go more into detail about the opportunity of renting to refugees. At the end of this webinar, we'll have time for a Q&A session. So I'd like to draw your attention to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions at all throughout the webinar, please be sure to enter them there, and we'll save those all for the end. My colleague Scott will be sorting through those and directing them to the appropriate panelists. We'll finish up with next steps, and then in the next week, you'll hear back from us with follow-up and an information packet. So as we dive in, I want to start with the basics. What is a refugee? A refugee is any person who is unable or unwilling to return or seek protection from their country of nationality due to a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. And a refugee is a very specific legal status. The Office of Refugee Resettlement also has 6 other humanitarian designations, including asylees, special immigrant visas, temporary protective status, and resettlement agencies serve all of these statuses. They all share legal documentation and the right to reside in the US. So in the course of working with resettlement agencies, you might also learn about opportunities to rent to some of those other humanitarian designations. In Michigan, we're actually among the top 5 states to receive refugees in the country. Between 2010 and 2020, we received 5% of all refugees resettled in America, behind Texas, California, and New York. In April of this year, we were actually number 3. The presidential determination, which sets the goal of refugees that the US will receive in a given fiscal year, The presidential determination for this year, 2022, is 125,000. So we might not receive a full 125,000, but that is the goal that the president has set. Now, in Michigan, the key resettlement players are the State of Michigan Refugee Services Program, which ensures coordination of all public and private resources and refugee resettlement in the state, ensures access to mainstream programs for people with refugee and other humanitarian statuses, distributes and oversees federal dollars to local agencies for direct service provision, and provides education and information about our new neighbors in Michigan. We also have 6 resettlement agencies in the state: Bethany Christian Services, Catholic Charities of Southeast Michigan, Jewish Family Services of Washtenaw County, Samaritas, St. Vincent Catholic Charities, and the United States Commission for Refugees and Immigrants in Dearborn. Across the state, we also have collaboratives like ourselves. So I've mentioned the Southeast Michigan Refugee Collaborative. I also mentioned the other 3 earlier as presenting partners. That's the Immigrant and Refugee Resource Collaborative of Mid-Michigan, Freedom Flight out of Grand Rapids, and the Kalamazoo Refugee Resource Collaborative. They operate in similar ways to us across sectors with stakeholders in refugee resettlement and social service provision. In Michigan, for nation of origin or refugees, in the last year, the top 5 were the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Burma. And from 2010 to 2020, we resettled more refugees from Iraq than any other country. Now, what does refugee resettlement look like? Well, before arriving in the US, refugees go through a very thorough process. On average, this process takes 18 months to 2 years, and it starts with receiving refugee status from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. They assess each individual case, gather all the background information, and submit the case to be considered for resettlement, then refer them to the US Department of State. Refugees then go through a security clearance and are actually the most vetted immigrant population. They go through in-person interviews with the Department of Homeland Security to verify their qualification for resettlement. They also undergo medical screening and then finally are matched with a resettlement agency here in the US. Upon their arrival, resettlement agencies support them with a myriad of things. The first program that they're enrolled in is reception and placement, which takes place the first 3 months of their residence here. This includes receiving them at the airport, finding housing, scheduling medical appointments, providing cultural orientation, enrolling them in public benefits, employment services and job placement, school enrollment, ESL and other educational programming, and then also connecting them with wraparound services. So as you can see, this is incredibly intensive case management. Beyond reception and placement, refugees are eligible for support from resettlement agencies up to 5 years after their arrival. And these cover a variety of things, including continued employment services, matching grant programs, and others. Now I'm going to turn you over to the experts. First up, we'll have Zachary Shive, sponsorship and resource developer at Samaritans. We have 3 panelists here from the Department of Housing and Urban Development: Rosalind Pedrosine, Susie Sapolewski, and Michael Pulsinelli. And finally, we have a case manager from USCRI in Dearborn, Hamid Ahmadzai, to share his personal story of coming to the US. So now I'm going to turn it over to Zach.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to be here with you today. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what my organization, Samaritas, and similar refugee resettlement organizations do, and why refugees are reliable tenants. So just a little bit about me first. As Emma mentioned, I am a sponsorship.
It looks like Zach's having some technical difficulties. So I think what we'll do for the time being is allow him to address those and move on to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And hopefully we can hear from Zach shortly. So let me kick it over to Rosalind, Susie, and Michael.
All right, thank you. Rosalind, why don't you start?
So I'm an investigator with the Department of Housing and Urban Development in our Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. And so just very briefly, for us in the Office of Fair Housing, ensuring access to housing to everyone, it's what we do. And, this is important not only because it's the law, but it's a best practice from our standpoint, from both an equity, but also a business practice standpoint. Having access to quality, safe, and unburdened housing is a critical need for every person. And we know that inequities in housing don't exist in a vacuum. And so a variety of fair housing issues, that exists from, issues that involve tenant on tenant, tenant on landlord issues to environmental justice issues. They really illuminate that where we live really has a major impact on every person. It's not just, the four walls that we live in. And so just very briefly jumping into what we enforce in the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, primarily is the Fair Housing Act. The Act protects people from discrimination when they apply to or while renting a home, when seeking housing assistance or engaging in other housing related activities, regardless of whether it's a federally assisted property or not. So that means that the Fair Housing Act itself, it governs all housing. That's both public and private housing. So the protections that are covered under the Fair Housing Act, the federal law prohibits discrimination based on 7 protected class statuses. So, which includes a person's national origin, race and color, and religion, which we'll focus on primarily now, as well as disability, sex, and familial status. Laws prohibiting national origin discrimination make it illegal to discriminate based on a person's birthplace, their ancestry, culture, or language. This means that people cannot be denied equal opportunity because they or their family are from a different country, because they have an accent, or because they participate in any particular customs, or because of who someone may be married to. So there's protection by association as well. Fair housing laws protect a person regardless of their immigration status. And so it does not matter whether someone is a citizen or not to be protected under the Fair Housing Act. The act makes it unlawful for a landlord to treat you any differently because of it. So that means, again, that's including if a landlord asks you questions about your immigration status based on a national origin basis, but it also includes asking whether or not a prospective tenant is in the country legally or not, or questions about religion. Department, our Office of Fair Housing is concerned that national origin discrimination may go unreported because of victims of discrimination either may not know what their legal rights are, or they may be afraid to complain to the government. And so that's why having events like this are so important, because getting the information out that's accurate about the protections that are out there for those from either immigrant communities or refugee communities, making sure that accurate information and resources for support is out there. And so just quickly, I'll go over some of the frequently asked questions we have related to this, and the other folks from HUD, feel free to jump in regarding any of these if you like. So regarding credit checks, may housing providers forego credit checks for any particular specific groups? Yes, landlords and property managers may generally forego credit checks for any potential resident, so long as they do not discriminate because of a protected characteristic under the Fair Housing Act. So those 7 protected classes that I went over. It is best practice for housing providers to review their credit check policies as well as other background check policies to ensure that they don't discriminate because of any of those protected statuses. Regarding occupancy limits, are there any general rules for determining when occupancy limits may be discriminatory? And also, may housing providers make exceptions to their occupancy limits? HUD, as a general piece of guidance, HUD advises that occupancy policy of 2 persons per bedroom is reasonable under the Fair Housing Act, but that reasonableness may depend on specific facts and circumstances of those requesting an occupancy limit in excess of that. And so again, that's based on the size or configuration of a unit, as well as the sleeping areas. And then also, depending on some of our different programs within HUD, there are different rules and processes for determining occupancy limits for units. So from a fair housing standpoint, this is important because a violation under a basis of occupancy may violate the Fair Housing Act. And what we see most often is violations against those are families with children, not so much extended families. So it's important to understand both the Fair Housing Act specifics as well as state and local laws, because there are in some jurisdictions different laws or specifics on occupancy based on a local law. And so to make sure a housing provider understands both the federal and state rules on occupancy. Affirmative marketing, what may landlords or property managers do or not do regarding advertising to specific groups. Housing providers should not publish any advertisement, that expresses a preference, as well as which may limit or discriminate, again, on any of those protected class basis. It's okay for a housing provider to target marketing to populations least likely to apply for housing without special outreach efforts. And those special outreach efforts may include marketing materials in other languages or providing materials in different formats for those with disabilities. And lastly, are there any rules or best practices that housing providers of non-subsidized properties should follow that ensure that people who are not fluent in English are being treated lawfully? And so, again, I just want to reiterate that regardless of whether a property is receiving federal assistance or not, there's an obligation to not discriminate against anyone on a basis of national origin. And national origin can be very closely related to the language that a person speaks. And so, again, as a best practice, to avoid discriminating, it would be important to include rental documents that are translated, contracting with interpreters, hiring bilingual staff, as well as using interpreter lines. And you can always reach out to our office in Fair Housing for resources or information on some of those resources that may be out there if you're not familiar or making use of them currently. And so now I just want to open it up to the other presenters from HUD if you want to add or expand on anything that I've talked about. And thank you.
Thank you, Roslyn. I don't have anything from the fair housing standpoint to add to your very thorough presentation. I do have a few other things I'll touch upon, but I'm going to turn it over to Susie first to talk about her area of expertise, which is multifamily housing. And Susie, I will add on after you're done.
Sounds good. Thanks for the invite to attend today. I believe I will be able to share my screen. Okay. Let me see. Okay, so I'm going to start with just very briefly, I'm going to run through a few websites where you can get information for my program area and briefly talk through issues. I believe, Emma, we can provide all these links afterwards because I sent them to you. Okay, great. So for multifamily, for those of you that don't know, there's a difference between public housing and multifamily. We both have Section 8. My division actually has project-based Section 8, so it stays with the property rather than the resident. Public housing stays with the resident rather than the property. So in my division, we have both FHA insured loans, which are very similar to single family FHA insured loans for multifamily apartment complexes. But more importantly, we have subsidy programs. So we have Section 8 subsidy, as well as what we call PRAC subsidy for special needs populations, which are generally 811s or Section 202s. This website, which I'm going to send you the link for, you can click on any of these particular things and it will give you the entire program description for that particular area of multifamily. It's a great reference point. I also wanted to touch on service coordinators because our properties do generally, many of them do have service coordinators, which can assist residents in getting access to services. And these are generally social workers. They basically have to be licensed social workers, master's levels. So they're great resources for the residents. And on this same webpage, there is a link to our service coordinator program. I believe I'm going to have to keep resharing, correct? I think each time I want to change sites. So hang on, let me just figure out how to get back here. Oh, I see. It's up there.
Susie, if they're in the same browser, we can see all of the tabs at the top. So that indicates to me that we should be.
Okay, great. So now did you just see when I changed?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I tried to open them all so that way I wouldn't have to keep doing it. Okay, I am going to include a reference for, I know this specific topic is about refugee housing. So I am going to include this handbook reference, and there are some very specific pages which we will include in there. There's about 13 pages that go through the eligibility criteria for our housing related to persons that are not U.S. citizen, full U.S. citizens. And so there it will explain in detail what the applicant needs to do to qualify. So I'll include that handbook reference because I think that's important to know. I also am going to include these fact sheets. I think they're really great references and they try to simplify things. So if you have an applicant or a refugee you're trying to help, these would be great fact sheets for you. So it kind of explains what the residents' responsibilities are, who the program helps, how the rent is determined. So I have one for both our PRAC and PAC properties as well as our Section 8. And our Section 8 is very similar to what you probably know of as a voucher. It's project-based, so it stays at these properties rather than a voucher goes with the resident. But this is the fact sheet for Section 8. Then I just have to look up at the top and then just a sec. I'm going to go over a sheet. This is also a reference. I clicked on the service coordinator program and it basically goes through showing you what this looks like, what their responsibilities are. And, again, I want to point out that these are all master's level social workers. So they're really great at their job and it's an excellent resource if you have persons you're trying to help that if you find a property with a service coordinator, they can also be of assistance to you in helping residents settle into their new apartment. I also wanted to show you that on the HUD webpage, I'm going to include a link to this that you can search any city. So for instance, if I searched by city and just picked, I think I was just picking Flint just for the heck of it, it pulls up all the multifamily properties. So these are all the properties that have anything to do with my division. There are check boxes. They might not come through very clear at the end, but the top says FHA, which would tell you if they have a mortgage with us. And then the second would tell you if they have Section 8 with us. So if you have two green check marks here, they have both a mortgage and Section 8. They can have just a mortgage. They can have a mortgage and Section 8 or just Section 8. So this is a great resource if you're trying to help somebody. This can show where properties are. I thought another really cool thing to show you is we worked with the state of Michigan, MSHDA, as well as there is another federal agency that does housing, rural housing. It's under the Department of Agriculture. So they do housing as well and ourselves. So we all got together after Hurricane Katrina and decided we should have a statewide database. So this next link is our statewide database. So you could enter the same, let me go up here and enter the same city, Flint. And yeah, I gotta move you just a little bit, I can't see. Okay, and so this pulls up all the properties in Flint that are affordable. So it would be more than just HUD. It would be MSHDA, rural housing, and HUD multifamily. So it basically shows you everything that's there. Some, you might question why on the screen you see the same property twice. So we decided rather than try to figure out, sometimes a property has both mission involvement, rural home, and HUD. So we decided rather than trying to figure out whose data rules, that we would just put all of our data in. So if you look over on the side, it will tell you what kind of subsidy it has. So there are properties that have multiple subsidies, so they might show on this list twice, but it's because they have different forms of subsidy. So this is a great resource if you're looking for just affordable housing in general. So it will be the tax credit properties, Section 8, rural housing, and I believe a future version of this, we do want to add public housing as far as like project-based public housing, because they do have some buildings they subsidize as well. So that's what I wanted to cover today, and I'm always happy to answer any questions at the end or in the future. So Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Susie. Good segue to the public housing side, which I'm going to cover today for our public housing director, Doug Gordon, who is not able to make it. So as Susie was mentioning, the properties that her division oversees, the housing subsidy, i.e. Section 8, stays with the property, whereas in the public housing side, that subsidy goes with the tenant, and the tenant's responsible for finding housing out in the marketplace. So I understand there's a number of landlords here, so we're appealing to you to, if you get a person who comes to you with a voucher, to please, if they meet all of your criteria, to accept them, because oftentimes folks have a hard time finding landlords that will accept their housing voucher. The beauty of a housing voucher is that you get guaranteed payment. It works where the resident pays no more than 30% of their income towards their rent. The government covers the rest. So you're always assured that you're going to be getting that portion of the payment sent to you every month. I do want to say that these vouchers are administered by public housing authorities in the state, which includes the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, which is the largest issuance of vouchers. And right now, there's no special priority for refugees or asylees. So unfortunately, there's no voucher that they can kind of ascend to the top of the list for. PHAs can target them. They need to put it in their PHA plan to do so. To my knowledge, I don't know of any PHAs yet in the state of Michigan that have done this, but they can do it. So it's important if you're assisting a refugee in obtaining housing to contact the PHA that is local to you, that where they want to live. Let's say Detroit. You would contact the Detroit Housing Commission. MISHDA handles them throughout the state, however. And there's also what we call traditional low rent public housing. And that's actually public housing that where the units are owned by the Housing Commission. They used to call them the projects. We don't like that term at HUD. We call them housing developments, but that's another option. And usually that has more availability, and it's easier to get into than the vouchers, because the vouchers are in very high demand, and there's typically waiting lists. And sometimes the housing authorities will actually close their waiting lists, not even accept new folks onto the list, until they've whittle down that list and then decide to open it back up. But just a couple other things to remember. If you're helping refugees, they may apply for some of our other special purpose vouchers that we have out there. Under the American Rescue Plan, under the Biden administration, they release a significant amount of what they call emergency housing vouchers. To apply in order to get one of those emergency housing vouchers, you have to be either homeless or in imminent risk of homelessness. That's one, fleeing domestic violence or human trafficking. So if they fit into one of those categories, then they can apply for one of these emergency housing vouchers through a local housing authority in Michigan. And then another special purpose voucher is what we call the mainstream voucher. That's targeted to people that have disabilities, enabling them to live on their own with the housing voucher. So that's another option as well. So with that, I'm going to to stop because I know we're kind of crunched for time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions along with my HUD colleagues as well at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rosalind, Susie, and Michael, for all of that information. And please don't worry about any technical issues. We've been on Zoom now for 2.5 years, and we all know that they happen daily, regardless of how often you use it. So I appreciate everybody's patience as we work through them. Next up, we're going to return to Zach to hear again about the reliability of refugee tenants and the support that resettlement agencies provide.
Hey again, everybody. I'm so sorry about technical issues here. Like I put in the chat, I am on mobile now. I'm going to not turn my camera on, and hopefully that will help us ease us through. So I'm going to jump right back into where I left off, talking about why refugees are reliable tenants. And that's because they're not alone as they go forward. So organizations like mine, like Samaritas, agencies that help refugees, partner with them in sort of like a comprehensive manner. Emma shared our slide with a bunch of the services we provide, but some of the ones that are particularly relevant to housing are financial support. So when refugees first get here, there is a federal resettlement grant that all refugees receive, and we use that for first month's rent and security deposit for a lot of our refugee clients. And we also help them apply for many public benefits. Michael was mentioning a few of them, some of the vouchers. There are tons of programs that help with rental assistance. I've worked a bunch in Wayne County here, and there's the ERAP program, which is a COVID rental assistance program. There are similar programs in different counties all across the state. And those are fantastic resources to help our refugees as they resettle, to help them with rent, the costs of rent as they get in. Additionally, we have agencies will have co-sponsorship programs, which can help. These aren't not all of our refugee clients get these, but a co-sponsorship program. Co-sponsorship is basically a community organization, such as a church or Rotary Club or other organization that says, "Hey, we want to help refugees resettle. We want to help out with the process." And so they'll offer support in various ways. One of them is financial support. And a lot of that, often that times that goes toward rent. So other things that help refugees be reliable tenants, services we provide are education and cultural orientation. Emma touched on that before, but just helping educate refugees on the process of housing, how it works in the United States. It's often a little different from country to country. Next week, I'm leading a cultural orientation and helping our clients understand, utility bills, as well as maintenance, things they're required to do, understanding the process of leasing and all the legalese and stuff like that. That's something we help educate our clients on and help them understand so they can be empowered to be a part of this process. Our goal is always to help our clients in the long term become self-sufficient and independent. We find that's the best outcome for people. But we are there with them every step of the way. And we're with the landlords too, every step of the way. Another way agencies like mine partner with refugees and landlords is translation services. As was mentioned previously, sometimes there's a language barrier. Sometimes there's a gap there. And that is something that our agencies are happy to help provide and fill in the gap there. Our case managers who are assigned to each family or individual usually have language skills. They're multilingual. And we also have other members of staff who are able to translate, whether that's at a lease signing to explain all the different complexities, whether that's if there are maintenance requests. We've had materials, we printed out like printed materials about specifics, who to call, if a water pipe bursts or stuff like that, so that we can minimize that gap between the landlord and the tenant as much as possible. That's something our agency offers on a continuing basis. I've also had landlords start text threads with their clients. So it's the landlord, refugee tenant, and a translator in the text thread so that any issues or anything like that can be solved. And it's a really good way for our refugees, the clients, to connect with the landlords, get to know them a little bit. And that builds trust. And it's a really neat thing. Another of the important services we provide is job placement and employment services. Like I said, we aspire to help our refugee clients become financially independent. And so most of our clients are employed within 4 months. This last batch of immigrants we had a large group from Afghanistan, and they were all employed much sooner than that. We have a number of amazing employers, and we're in Southeast Michigan where I work, that work closely with us to hire our clients who want work and even provide transportation and translation services as well. They're really on board to help our refugees integrate into the community. Yeah, so we have our agency, and agencies like Samaritas have professionals whose jobs it is to help find and secure employment and help with continuing employment for our clients so that they can increasingly cover their own rent expenses. There are also other services we have that help with, not directly with paying rent, but just really things that I think are valuable in the whole housing process. We have mental health services. The refugee resettlement process is complicated. Everyone's case is a little bit different. People have to leave their homes, pick up in varying circumstances. And so we partner with them in helping get mental health resources to help them integrate into a new community, which can be complicated, and help them as they're adjusting to a new society. I can just run through a few of these quickly, as I mentioned them before, but we also help kids get enrolled in schools. There are ESL classes that we provide different locations throughout the entire year. We also help them apply for a number of programs, such as temporary assistance for needy families, TANF programs, refugee cash assistance programs, RCA, along with food assistance programs, SNAP, refugee medical assistance through Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, MDHHS. So we help our clients apply for all those services and help them be able to enjoy those benefits so that those financial and, even emotional burdens are much more manageable. And then just a few more things that I've found helpful in this process are signing shorter leases. The typical, lease is 1 year. One thing that we found helpful is to shorten the term a little bit, make it maybe 3 months or 6 months, so that there's the ability to reevaluate after those 3 months or 6 months and make sure, hey, how are the finances doing? Is the client able to keep up with rent? Are there any issues that need to be addressed? We find that to be a great protection for refugees as well as landlords in that circumstance. So that no one's stuck in a lease for a very long period of time that they can't afford. I also want to emphasize the thorough vetting process that Emma mentioned previously. It's very thorough. Their biographical data is collected, biometrics, there's an interview process, multiple government agencies, including the FBI. It's a very thorough vetting process for refugees coming into the country. So, just to wrap it all up, in my experience, it has been well worth it for our landlords and for our refugees to partner together. There have been really neat relationships that have been built, fulfilling both ways. And you're not alone as landlords. Refugees are not alone. Resettlement agencies are there to walk step in step with everyone throughout the process and ensure that it's really mutually beneficial. So with that, I will turn it back over to Emma. Thank you so much. And thanks for bearing with me in the technical issues.
Thank you so much, Zach. I want to make a quick reminder that if you have any questions throughout these presentations, you can submit them through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll hear now from Hamid Ahmadzai about his personal experience coming to the U.S., and then we will open the Q&A portion of the event. So Hamid, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Hamid from USCR. I am a case manager here to USCR, U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. So coming to the United States, so it was last year, August 15, when the Afghan government collapsed, and the US they had to go back to United States. So they were bringing people, and the people that their lives were in threat and danger in Afghanistan, and the people that they work for them. So the plan for them was to take them, like as Emma described previously, the refugees coming to the United States, they should go through a organized process that they should be registered as refugees with UN and other steps. But for Afghans, it was not the same process. It happened all of a sudden. The US, they took the people from Afghanistan, but they couldn't take them directly to United States. So they had to go to a third and fourth country. They took for some people to third country, and some of them to even to fourth and fifth country to check their background status to be sure. And then after that, they brought the people here. In my case, they took me to the fourth country from Afghanistan. I left Afghanistan on 20th of August. I went to a third country, to Qatar. I stayed there for almost 10 days for the process, for the biometrics. And when they were sure, so they took us to another country, and we stayed there for almost two days. So after the background check and security checkup, so they brought us to United States. So when before the webinar started, Emma asked me about my phone number. It was the area code 202. So I told her that. She said, "Well, what's this area code 202?" I told her it's from Washington D.C. I landed there in Washington. Then the U.S. Army, they took us from Washington to Indiana to a military camp to be there for the health screening, for our social security, for our EIDs employment authorization, and for the background checkup. So I stayed there for 2 months. And then, so the process was, so if you have a US tie, if you belong to someone that they're already staying at the United States, so you should go to that state. I chose Virginia to go there, but the thing is, Virginia is the most populated place for the refugees of Virginia and New York and some other states. So they said, like, IOM said, we cannot take you there. So I left my case open. They took me here to the Michigan on 22nd of November of the last year. So I think I was lucky that I didn't go there and I came here. So when I came here, I came through USCRI, the US Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. And I spent almost 10 days. So after that, they offered me a job to be employed by them, as like I speak the two formal languages of Afghanistan, Pashto and Dari. So I joined USCRI as a case aide first. And then after that, so I was at the same time a client of USCRI and also an employee of them. And that's all from my personal story coming to United States. But I just want to add something to the title of this meeting, that is refugee and a credible or someone who the landlord is willing to give their house. So as an on-site coordinator, an on-site guy for the resettlement of the refugee that I was involved in, so I noticed some of the obstacles for the refugees that they are facing when we used to resettle them. So one was social security. So when some refugee came to the United States, so some of them, their social security was denied, or it took longer than usual. So the social security was one obstacle that the landlord was not willing to give the house to the refugees. Another thing was the credit score. It was important thing because the landlords, they were asking about the history of someone that they already have in the United States. So they're willing to give their houses to those people. And another thing is the occupancy limit, that like some of them, they're not willing to give their houses to the people that they are more than like 8 or 10 people. And another thing was employment, the job. But all those obstacles were like they didn't influence and affect the state of the refugees, the status of them to be resettled in their permanent houses, because of the support of the Michigan state. And also, especially when we resettle people, most of them in Detroit and some of them in Dearborn and other areas. But from the city of Detroit, the support of them was exceptional. They really supported the people, and especially through the MESHDA and SARA COVID emergency rental assistance, and from ERA, from Wayne County emergency rental assistance program. So as those people come to the front and they supported the people, so after that, I think they granted the status to refugees to become reliable tenants. And the most important thing is the employment. Now, as far as I know, the Afghan people, the Afghan refugees, the APAs, that they came to Michigan, as far as I know, that they are our clients or other agencies' clients. So most of them, almost all of them, they're working and they're employed. So everything is becoming normal and going smooth. So I think they are reliable tenants now. And that's all. I will go back to Emma. If you have any question, you can put it in Q&A or portion there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hamid. Yes, so there are a couple of things that I want to emphasize that you heard from our panelists. The first is that refugees face specific challenges in finding housing. And you heard both from myself and from Zach that in the process of resettlement, refugees go through an incredibly thorough vetting process. The background checks that they are put through are probably more intensive than the ones that landlords have access to when running background checks for potential tenants. So in regards to concerns of safety or anything like that, refugees are very, very thoroughly vetted. Secondly, Social Security numbers. Many landlords are hesitant to rent to refugees upon arrival because they don't yet have their Social Security number, or as Hamid said, there have sometimes been delays in securing those. That is not to say that they do not have Social Security numbers. They receive those very shortly after arriving. Finally, credit checks. Refugees don't have the opportunity often in their home countries to build up credit because the system that we have here in the US is fairly unique. It's being adopted more across other parts of the world, but generally speaking, refugees, once they arrive, do not have credit. And so the support that Zach went into previously goes a long way to ensuring the reliability of refugee tenants. Resettlement agencies provide intensive case management, are able to connect them not only to public services and other programs from which they can benefit, but are able to employ early interventions if there are ever issues. So if, say, a landlord does have an issue with a tenant, they can also lean on resettlement agencies for support there in addressing any challenges or concerns. With all of that being said, refugees are incredibly reliable tenants, and it is important to the outcome of their integration here in the US that they are able to receive stable housing early on. Housing goes a long way towards self-sufficiency, and it is such an important and stabilizing factor within their journey here. So we are heavily reliant on landlords like yourselves to open your rental units to refugees. And if you have any other concerns that weren't addressed, again, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A. We'll also provide contact information at the end. So if there's anything that comes up in the meantime, you can reach out to us to ask any of those questions. But for right now, I will turn it over to Scott, who has been monitoring the Q&A feature, to address some of these questions to our panelists. And yes, sorry, I'm just seeing in the chat. Yes, Daria, I will also email the contact information. So Scott, over to you.
All right, thank you, Emma. And we do have some questions. Thank you to everybody who has asked those questions. Let's start. Our first question is about credit checks. I know we touched on this, but we have a question that's asking, credit checks are a real barrier in Lansing, but they can be a barrier in many places. Is there a way to bypass these credit checks when renting to refugees? Rosalind, I thought you might be a good person to weigh in here, but if anyone else from HUD is interested in answering this question, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I actually don't have a very specific answer for that. The short answer essentially is that landlords can forego credit checks as long as it's being done equally. And so for any person of any different background, as long as the credit checks exception is being applied equally, then from a fair housing standpoint, HUD is fully okay with that. Now, in terms of actually successfully getting a landlord to forego a credit check, I would defer maybe to Emma or Zachary, because the best suggestion that I would give is, it's the importance of building those relationships and finding landlords and housing providers who want to, and are more able to be willing to extend that exception. And if anyone from HUD wants to stand in from a program standpoint, please feel free to.
Sure. I can just add really quick to you, Rosalind. So HUD allows owners to reject an applicant that has poor credit history, but what HUD also requires is that a lack of credit history is not sufficient grounds to reject an applicant. So people with no credit history, they actually may have an easier time getting housing through the Section 8 program. So that's all I wanted to add.
I would also
Susie, I saw your hand was up. Oh, go ahead.
For multifamily, we do not require credit checks per se. However, we allow the landlord, we give broad ranges of screening criteria. There are a few mandatory ones such as lifetime sex offender, certain crimes that we require, like drug offenses that properties have to screen for. But other than that, the landlords are allowed to make their own screening criteria. However, they cannot screen each applicant differently. So whatever screening criteria they use, they have to use for all of their applicants. Most properties that I oversee do use some form of credit screening, but I agree with Mike, lack of credit history is not a problem. And also they're generally pretty flexible on scores or what you see on there.
Yeah, and especially with refugee populations who probably the main issue would be a lack of credit history. So if that's not a barrier for Section 8, that's a good thing.
Great. Okay, thank you. Susie, this might be a good question for you. We have a follow-up question regarding HUD and its relationship to newly arrived Americans who might not have a lot of documentation. Somebody's asking, is there a type of waiver for the federal citizenship rule that allows funds from HUD to be used to benefit refugees and immigrants who have not completed the naturalization process yet?
Yeah, I would refer back, I'm going to include the handbook reference from my program area, but I think you'll also find it pretty similar for most of the HUD programs on what we require. So there's a whole list, actually it's an entire page long of documentation we will accept. And depending on where the applicant is in that process, the subsidy will either be a full subsidy or in some cases it's a prorated subsidy, depending on if there's multiple members of the household, depending on where each of them are at with their status. So that handbook is very specific on what the requirements are, but definitely you do not have to be all the way through the process in order to receive housing. We have lots and lots of residents that are at various stages. It does require the on-site manager and the management company to keep track of that process with the resident, and as things change, they need to update things and get maybe additional forms and documentation for HUD and potentially go from prorated rent to full rent at some point as well.
Great, thank you. We have another question I'd like to open up to our HUD panelists at large. The question is, the normal screening process relies on social security numbers that's used to collect damages if any occur. Are there any alternatives?
So I'm not sure I understand the question, but Susie, maybe you know more about it than I do.
Are they asking if they can use a different form of number?
Yes, I think so.
I think that's the heart of the
Yeah, we do in that same handbook reference. It will go through the different documentation we can accept, and not everyone has a social security number. So there are other forms of documentation we can accept, and there's an entire page that will explain each of the different. I will admit I'm not an expert in the immigration process, but it does lay out each form and document and what kind of number HUD would use off of that, and how long it would be acceptable for, because eventually the hope is that residents would get all the way through the process. But yeah, you do not have to have a social security number in my department.
Great. Okay, thank you. Michael, we have a question that I thought you'd be well positioned to answer given your position. Given that some areas of Southeast Michigan are grouped with Detroit for fair market rent, it creates a challenge for counties because their rents are not in line with Detroit's rents. Is there any effort to assess this or to address this issue?
So thanks for that question, Scott. It comes up all the time and has been coming up for years and years. So yeah, so fair market rents in Detroit, as you know, they're all lumped together. It's called Detroit, Livonia, Warren. It encompasses Wayne, Oakland, Macomb counties. I think even beyond that, it's a problem. And you know, and rents in Oakland County are at such a level that oftentimes the payment standard that HUD allows based on the fair market rents does not allow a resident to live in certain areas of Oakland County, because landlords can get more rent charging market rate and not accepting a voucher. And you know, HUD only covers so much, and we don't allow the holder of the voucher to cover the difference other than their 30%. They can't go over their 30%, in other words. So they have to find a place to live that falls within that. It's a problem in Detroit and other areas of the country, and HUD is looking into it. We have a division called Policy Development and Research that actually crunches the numbers and sets these fair market rents every year. They know it's an issue. You know, there's a personal story. There's a woman I've been dealing with. She's very upset because she wants to live in Oakland County. She's got her voucher from the Detroit Housing Commission, and the payment standard just isn't high enough for the area of Oakland County where she wants to live. So I guess my answer really is a non-answer. Yes, we know it's a problem. Yes, we're looking into it, but for now it is what it is.
Great. We have a question that I think Zach Samaritas would be good to answer. Are there any barriers or safety concerns regarding single-family rental houses in Detroit neighborhoods? How does Samaritas and other resettlement agencies assess whether the house is safe and livable?
Yeah, great question. Yes, there are. Definitely, there's some wonderful parts of Detroit where we've been able to place a lot of our clients. As Hamid said, the city of Detroit has been great partners, but there are also parts of Detroit and other communities where we haven't felt comfortable putting our clients, particularly those with small children and with limited English skills. So there is actually a specific form that we're required to use. We have to vet all the properties before we accept them. And so we actually, I believe that form, or a summarized version of it, will be going out with the informational packet next week that sort of goes over the criteria. And one of those criteria is the safety of the neighborhood. So very good question. Yeah, that's something that we're conscious of and we pay attention to. And yeah, there are specific requirements that we are required by our contracts with the state and federal government to meet in order to place families in certain places.
And I'll jump in here very quickly to say that the resettlement agencies don't undertake a formal
evaluation. Is that what you're
evaluation? I think, right. So it's not like the process that you have to go through in order to list your property as a rental property or anything like that. But it's more of an informal process through which the resettlement agency case managers usually, or housing coordinators, will come and visit the property with a checklist. So it's not a formal evaluation.
Great. Thanks for that clarification, Emma. Zach, there's another question that I think you'd be well positioned to answer. How would you get a personal reference check from a refugee tenant?
Yeah, another good question. So we have financial literacy courses and education that we help our refugee clients go through. And so as they are in our programs, they're learning about those things, learning about how personal checks work. We help them open up bank accounts shortly after arriving in the States. And that is also something that their case managers work very closely with them on, that education piece and learning how, writing a check works and those things go. So again, our the client isn't alone in that. They're not tossed out to try and figure it out on their own. They have the support of the agencies, and we work with landlords to accommodate their individual needs for paying rent. Some of them like to do it through an online portal. Others of them prefer a personal written check, like was mentioned. So yeah, again, that's where the agencies will support and help educate the clients and be with them as they're writing checks and such.
Great. We do have another question. I think Michael or Zach might be able to weigh in here. What laws or policies need to be changed at the state level to ensure that refugees have equal access to resources and to reduce barriers for renting?
Well, I can tell you Mike can't answer that because I don't really know. I'm more well-versed on the federal side of things, so I don't really know what the barriers are on the state side. Zach, maybe you know?
Yeah, man, that's a big question. And I think we could do a whole seminar on unpacking that question. I guess just off the top of my head, from my perspective.
What I can say, I will say this real quick, Zachary, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, please.
There could be some type of, I guess, drive or convening with local housing authorities, which are state entities, to get them to give priority to refugees that are seeking housing in their public housing plans. That would enable the housing vouchers as they come up to more easily go to the refugee community. So that's one area. And that would take, the housing authority would have to have its board vote on that and agree to make the change to their public housing plan. But that is one thing that could be done. Just came to me anyways.
Yeah, that's great. I think that legislation is a little less in my wheelhouse, but I mean, maybe even something as simple as raising awareness, things like this, even this webinar where landlords and the community at large are made aware of the situation with refugees, and how they're able to be supported. I think, that's less law, but just sort of raising the awareness in general, I think is a helpful step.
Right. And Scott, do you mind if I jump back to the fair market rent question? So when that question was posed, I sent a quick email to his name is Todd Richardson. He's actually the head of PD&R at HUD in Washington, D.C. And I kind of sent him the question, and he didn't respond enough time for me to speak, but he has responded since. And I just wanted to point out a couple of things. So he says, yes, FMRs are an issue across the country because of sharp increases in asking rents coming out of the pandemic. We are working on the problem. We should be issuing a notice soon on the topic. Be on the lookout. So that's more definitive that they're working on it, and there will be a HUD notice out soon on that. And then I think there was a follow-up question about if you wanted to send comments or questions to PD&R, and there is a way to do so. So the email address is helpdesk, HELPDESK, at huduser.gov. And I'll put it in the chat as well, so you guys have it.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thank you for sending that email. That was really valuable. That looks like all the questions we have. If anyone else wants to ask a question, please do so now. But thanks to everybody who did ask questions. I thought they were really good questions and we got really good answers. So thanks to our panelists.
Great, thank you. So there's a couple of things that I'd like to highlight, and then we're going to wrap this up. So I appreciate so much of you for taking the time to join us today. One other point on the reliability of refugee tenants. The majority of refugees stay in the area that they are resettled. There are secondary migration cases in which some families might relocate to be closer to relatives that have also been resettled somewhere else in the US. But for the most part, most refugees stay in the area that they are resettled. And so being able to connect with landlords and find housing is key to that trend. And it's really helpful there. They aren't likely to be going back to their countries. Most refugees come from situations that currently are not, they're not able to return to. And they generally don't move around. So this is a great way to welcome newcomers that are going to be building lives, having children, and contributing to our neighborhoods and cities in the long term. Secondly, we had a question about what's happening at the state level to make resources and programs more accessible to refugees, but there's also things happening at the county level. Off the top of my head, I can think of a few here in Southeast Michigan. Melanie Grund mentioned the Landlord Mitigation Fund in Oakland County. The city of Detroit and Wayne County have also created programs using COVID funds from the SERA and ARPA acts to provide housing assistance to residents that refugees and other ORR populations are able to access. And the resettlement agencies housing or looking for housing or for their clients are aware of the local programs available, where they're housing clients. So, the Bethany and Samaritas will know of any programs that refugees will be eligible for in Grand Rapids and Kent County, for instance. Finally, we're talking about policy. We will be having an event in August, our first advocacy day as a collaborative with elected officials from the federal, state, and county levels to talk more about these suggestions. So that is coming up. Before we end this webinar, I want to answer one final question that was posted in the chat, which is how would we connect with refugees seeking housing in Detroit? That is such a great question. I'm glad you asked because I'm about to share that with you now in the chat. That is a link, a Google form. And if you are interested in renting to refugees, you can complete that form. It asks for your name and contact information. It asks for some basic details about the properties that you have, such as the number of bedrooms, because there are requirements based on family size for a number of bedrooms that resettlement agencies secure for their clients, as well as proximity to public transportation, rent ranges, and the cost of move-in, so with the security deposits and whatnot. And the location that your properties are in. So this contact list will be made available to resettlement agencies directly so that their housing coordinators and case managers can reference it when they're looking for housing for their clients. And if you sign up for it, they will reach out to you directly when they have a client that they think your properties might be a good fit for. So that link is in the chat. So as I said, join the landlord contact list. Resettlement agencies will be able to reach out to you directly when they have refugees who arrive. Generally, they try to secure housing even before refugees arrive here in Michigan. So it's helpful if they're able to access those properties ahead of time to set them up and have them furnished for refugees' arrival. And then following this webinar, we'll be sharing the recording of the webinar, as well as an information packet with all of the information and resources shared today and some contact information for any questions and things like that. That includes some frequently asked questions. It includes some facts from UNHCR about refugee resettlement in the US. It includes the safety screening that Zach mentioned earlier, and what kind of the basic standards that we look for in apartments for refugees, apartments and houses for refugees. And yeah, the next thing we'll be hearing from the resettlement agencies when they have clients looking for housing. In the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You'll be seeing the email with follow-up information and the recording in your inbox next week after the holiday weekend. And I thank you all for joining. A special thank you to our panelists, Zachary Shive, Susie Sabalewski, Rosalind Pedricine, Michael Polsonelli, and Hamid Ahmadzai. Thank you as well to Scott for his support in this program, and to everyone with the Southeast Michigan Refugee Collaborative who helped to organize this, and to our partners across the state, which include regional collaboratives, as I mentioned before, like the Immigrant and Refugee Resource Collaborative in Mid-Michigan. Shireen is on the call today, and you will be receiving information on contacting them as well. And in the landlord contact form, one final thing to note there, this is the first time that we are creating this. So it's possible that it will evolve as we discover some best practices. But I want to be sure that I want you to understand that you will be contacted if anything happens or any changes are made with the management of that contact list. We'll make sure that it's a very open and transparent process, that your information is protected, and that if any changes to the management impact your willingness to be included, you have opportunities there to opt out. But yeah, so thank you again, everybody, for joining us. I hope that this was an incredibly educational and informative afternoon for you. And we look forward to hearing from you and to hearing about all the connections that are made after this webinar. So thank you. Have a good rest of your afternoon, and look out for the follow-up email next week.